Ever wondered what eternity is? What if time as we know it never started? And what if it will never end? Imagine a reality where there's no beginning, no middle, and no end. Just an infinite stretch of existence. This is the concept of eternity. Before we dive into the depths of eternity, let's first break down what we mean by eternal. It is a concept that goes beyond the limits of our day-to-day lives. We measure everything by time, hours, days, years, but eternity operates outside or beyond of that system. It's not just a long stretch of time. It's something that never began and will never end. So how do we even start to wrap our minds around it? Spiritual thinker Martinus describes an eternal world picture. It consists of eternal principles. These principles has never started and will never cease to exist. So his description of these eternal principles is in a way a description of something eternal. However, we constantly experience things that has a start and an end. We have our daily lives where we see things come and go. So where do they come into the picture? How do they fit into this eternal world picture? The day-to-day things are based on eternal principles, but they are not eternal or eternal principles themselves. For instance, we find that many things are circular. Something starts out, that could be the morning of the day, it turns into midday and afternoon, then evening and night, and then a new day comes around. That circular principle also happens with the year and our life. We see things starting out, culminating, and then go into a decline. And after that, whatever came out of that decline goes into a new beginning and start out. That's a principle. That's a general, eternal principle in our life. Martinus explains that our eternal existence as living beings are structured in a circular structure as well. It has phases that keeps repeating, and this is the eternal part. The notion that the same structure keeps repeating and always have been repeating in the same pattern. When one circle ends, a new one starts. But this circular idea is an eternal principle. I should say that we experience each circle differently. This is where the timely or the day-to-day things come in and colors our life. So every grand cycle is both similar and different. Like every day in our life has similarities, but all of them are different. We don't experience the same day, but there are definitely some parts that are similar. We have a morning, afternoon, and all those kind of things. The similarities are the eternal principles, and the differences is the timely things that we experience. That was a brief introduction to understanding the eternal from Martinus' perspective. This channel's name is the Eternal World Picture to highlight that we deal with an eternal view. Understanding what eternal means in the first place is important, and we go more into it in this video. Please leave a comment on your thoughts about eternity. What is it to you? How can we understand it? Please like the video if you find it valuable, and subscribe to the channel to get more eternity related videos. That would be very much appreciated. So what is eternity? In this section I will give you some characteristics on what eternity is. Let me start by saying what it isn't. There is this notion that we can be born as humans and achieve an eternal life. Martinus is pretty clear that this is not how it works. According to Martinus, something eternal cannot start, and that includes eternal life. He argues that if something has started, then it will always have an age. This is the case no matter how far out in the future we go. Your measurement will have a starting point and an end point. It will have an age. Thus, this is not an eternal life or something eternal. It is a life that has started and is therefore timely. Eternal is something that has never started and will never end. So the age of eternity is in some ways infinity or no age. You cannot put any numbers on it, because then you need a starting point and an end point, and then it's not eternal anymore. So the question about how long time eternity is does not make sense from this point of view. You can say that Eternity is all the time that exists if you really want to put something on it. And it's not just the time that has been and the time that is now, but it's also all the time that is in the future. So what else can we say about eternity? Well, we can say it has no details. And how is that? If something doesn't have a starting point and an end, then it doesn't have any details that we can experience. All details that we can experience have to be defined in space and time. We cannot experience something that is outside space and time. It has to have an age. They have to exist in time. It goes back to this idea that if something has a starting point and an end point, then it has an age. And if it has an age, it's not eternal. So what can we say about something that has no details? Something that has no details is not manifested. That something isn't manifested doesn't mean it doesn't exist, just that it is without any details. Thus, Martinus states that we can only describe eternity as something there is. If we try to put details on such a thing, we can call it big, we can call it good, lovely, evil, small, so forth, then we are in the timely realm of things. We can see eternity in our number system. We know it as 0. So what is 0? We can take one equation where we do x equal x plus 0. That would be a true equation. And it shows if we have the x and add the 0, then we'll still have the x. That means the 0 does not have any manifestation. It doesn't add anything to something else. So that shows it's not manifested. So can it exist if it's not manifested? Well, let's take another equation. Let's do x equal x times 0. That equation will be false because the x will not be equal x unless it's also a 0. But let's assume that x is something else than 0. So in that case, it actually shows that the 0 has an effect on the things that actually exist, the timely. So that's an example that we actually can see in our number system, that we have this eternity or this eternal thing going on. Another thing about eternity is that it cannot appear or evolve from something timely. It has either always been there or it is something timely that has started at some point. That essentially means that the idea about getting an eternal life is a misunderstanding in the sense that if we don't already have an eternal life, then we won't get it. However, we can have a period of time in our eternal existence where we don't know that we have an eternal life. We can be under the perception or the belief that our life starts when we are born and it's done when we are dead. Or we can have a perception where we are born and then for some religious reason, if we do whatever we are told or whatever it takes, we will get into heaven and get this eternal life. So we are in a period where we don't know about our eternal life. We generally don't know the solution to the mystery of life, and we don't know if we have an eternal life or not. That is pretty much up in the air. Martinus had some spiritual experiences that enabled him to see eternal principles, and he conveys that we are eternal living beings. And furthermore, he says we will at some point also come to understand this on our own. We will come to understand that we are eternal living beings. But that is not the case right now. Martinus describes all this in his eternal world picture. I'll go into more details about the eternal world picture in the next section. So Martinus has named his description of the world as the eternal world picture. It is eternal because it describes and builds on principles that are eternal. That means that they have never started and will never stop. They have never been created. There is no intention behind them because they never started. They are just there. And this can be really hard to grasp and accept because we are so used to thinking in terms of something that is created with a specific goal in mind. But that's only the case if something has started at some point. But eternal principles has always been and will always be. Martinus explains that everything that exists is founded on these eternal principles. Together, these principles make up the foundation of life and all the things that exist. The principles also become absolute truth because they never change. And absolute is something that never changes. As stated earlier in this video, eternity has no timely details and are unmanifested, so the principles don't change. To give you an idea about the principles Martinus is describing, I will go through a couple of them, and it will be very briefly, and I will link to some videos that will elaborate more on the principles. So the first principle I would like to talk about is the living being. The living being consists of some principles. Martinus talks about 3 principles. He says there's the principle of the created. That's all the thing that is changing. And then there is an I, like I do something. And the I is actually eternal and something that just is because it's beyond and above the created. So that's the second principle. And the third principle for the living being is the ability to create and perceive. So the eternal analysis of the living being is that there is an I with an ability to create and perceive something created. And you can even argue that you need all 3 of them. So if you take away the I, the only thing that's left is an ability to create something. But there's nothing to use this ability. There's nothing to direct it. And then Martinus says, if that's the case, then there's no change, there's no life, there's nothing to experience. And then he says, okay, so what do you see? Well, we see change all the time. So the I has to be there. And then you can say, okay, let's drop the ability to create. So then you have an I and you have the created. But you don't have the ability to change anything. So that will also mean that you go into a state of absolute silence. And again, that's not what we experience. And the third argument is basically you have the I that can direct. It has the ability to change things and direct, but you don't have anything to change. And in that case, if you don't have anything to change, you're not able to change anything. And then you will have this absolute silence again. And that's not the case in real life. So all 3 principles has to be there. That was just an example of how Martinus argues in his work. So a lot of his work is actually made up of these kind of arguments that he states, actually turns it into a science. We can actually check it ourselves. You can think through this logic I just gave you here. So that's 3 principles that together make a 4th principle. That's the living being. Then there is the contrast principle that states that in order to experience anything, we need contrasts. The general idea here is that if you only have white, you cannot experience something. You need a contrast to that white. You need something darker, maybe even black. And if you don't have that, you won't be able to experience anything. And that's the physical world. And Martinus goes further and says that also applies to a mental part. So in order to experience something pleasant, we sometimes have to experience something unpleasant. Good news is that we don't need to experience a lot of the unpleasant things in order to experience a lot of the good things, or the pleasant things, so to speak. So another principle is the hunger and saturation principle. It basically states that we have a hunger for experienced life, a certain type of experience, and when we have experienced that type of experience for a while, we get saturated by that one and we need a new type of experience. So that's a principle that actually drives this circle I was talking about. There's a period of time where we need one, let's say, pleasant experience, and at some point that pleasant experience in this circle starts to get unpleasant because we get so saturated that we get bored of it, tired of it, and we want something else. So we have a hunger for its contrast. And then we turn to that contrast, we have a hunger for that, we get saturated by that at some point, and then we return because we don't have a hunger in it, we are saturated by the thing we just had, and we want to get back to where we started out, so to speak. And that goes on and go on. So we are actually going around in this circle of experiences on our own. We want to move on all the time. So it's not like a prison or anything. It's something we want all the time. There's a short period of time, and that's the one we live in right now, where things are not funny, where things are unpleasant. We can talk about wars, poverty, and sickness, and all those kind of things. And we have to get through them to get this darker part in us. So we have this contrast I just talked about. Anyway, that's a long conversation. I have a couple of links in the description that you can look into. And then Martinus has a principle about life being within life. And that's basically about that every living being, like you and me, has life within us and are part of something bigger. So he talks about the principle of microcosmos. That's essentially the living being that are bigger than ourselves. In this case, we live on the earth. And he says that's a living being. And he says even the earth has something bigger to live in. That's the solar system. And the solar system lives in the galaxy, and so forth and so forth. That goes up in the big things, but it also goes the other way. And he says, yeah, well, your brain, your organs, they are also living beings. They are obviously a completely different kind of living beings than we are, but he says they're still living. That's why we can feel the pain. That actually comes from living beings that lives in our body and makes up our body. But we are sort of the macro living being of our body, so that's why we have control of our body. Those organs and so forth also consist of living beings. We know them as cells, and the cells are built by molecules, and the molecules by atoms, and so forth. That's also a principle that a living being is always living in another living being, with one exception, and that's God. And I cannot go into that in this video, but God is by definition everything. So he's a macro living being to all living beings. But that's a different video. So that was some examples of eternal principles by Martinus, and you can watch other videos for more info about the principles, and you can read Martinus' own work, and there will come more in the future about these principles and Martinus' eternal world picture. And if you want to follow that, please subscribe to the channel. And if you found this video valuable in any way, please give it a like. And if you have any opinion or anything to say about eternity and principles and all the stuff I have said here, please leave a comment below. I'll be happy to reply to comments and questions and so forth. And then I'll just say thanks for watching the video. Thank you.